Wholeness, welcome. This is Josh Dippold, and today I have Bob Martin with me. Bob, what's going on today?
Well, thanks. Thanks for having me. I appreciate being here. And I want to take a moment just to thank you for what you do because, putting together a podcast is not an easy thing. And especially when you're doing it to benefit your listeners, it's just an act of grace. And so thank you for doing what you do.
I appreciate that. I've had a couple guests on that mention that, and people usually don't see the work that has to go on behind the scenes and stuff like that. Gotten a little better over the years, but yes, thank you so much for that. The standard question I usually do, maybe people are getting bored of it or not, but it gets me out of reading an intro. Who is Bob Martin and what kind of work does he do?
So it's an interesting story, and I suppose my story is unique, but then everyone's story is unique. It is different in the facts, but it's not different in kind of like the age-old thing of your life moves along and then things start to go downhill and you hit bottom and all of a sudden a revelation comes to you and it makes a difference and it changes your life. That's not such an unusual story. But just to give you a little background, my folks were European immigrants, and my dad was Hungarian royalty, and the Bolsheviks wiped out his family, and my mom was Roma Gypsy, and well, everybody wiped out theirs. So when they came to America, they did not become, I wouldn't say they were anti-religious, but they were non-religious. So I didn't grow up in a particularly religious family. We were in the popcorn business and amusement parks and carnivals and the like. And so it was an interesting young life. Somehow, through a strange set of circumstances, I became a lawyer and started out in Miami working for Janet Reno and rose up through the ranks and became the head of consumer frauds and economic crimes. And we hit the mob for a lot of money. And I shortly left the office and, I'll call him Johnny, came to see me within a couple of weeks. And he said, you got to be good to hit us for that much money. And we'd like to send you some clients. So for the next few years, I was, I guess you'd call it a mob lawyer. And I got to know all of the heads of the Colombians and the Haitians and the Cubans and the Peruvians and the Italians and the like. And I started going out with them and visiting all those chrome and glass discotheques of the 70s. This was during the cocaine cowboy days. It was crazy in Miami. And so I was maybe partying a little bit too much. And things were kind of falling apart at the family. Somehow I managed never to bring it into the courtroom, but barely. And I started seeing a therapist. And one day I came to a big crossroads in my life. And I go to my therapist, whose name was George, and I said, George, what should I do? What should I do? And he picked up some coins and started shaking his hands and dropping the coins on the table and making some calculations. And eventually he drew a bunch of lines and came to a number. And he opened up this big book to that chapter and showed me the title, and the title was Retreat. And I promptly cursed him out because I'm paying the guy, to be a therapist, and now he's being an alchemist with coins and the like. And I cursed him out and stomped out. And I drove around Miami for a while, and I realized that one word, it just sunk into my consciousness. And I just had to stop the direction I was going in. I had to retreat. And I went back sheepishly to him a little later, and I said, what was that? And he goes, oh, that was the I Ching. And I go, what's the I Ching? And he says, oh, it's a Daoist practice. And I said, what's Daoism? So I then found out that my therapist was the English language editor for Master Watching Ni, a 72nd generation priest from the Shaolin Temple. Shaolin is where Kung Fu comes from, and all of the Daoist practices, Tai Chi, all those things. So I asked him about it, and I found out that it was a map for living an effective and efficient life, and it didn't ask me to believe in any supernatural beings, anything I couldn't touch, feel, or experience. So I took to it like a fish takes to water. I just loved it. It's like, when you're born, nobody gives you an owner's manual, you know? And this was an owner's manual. This was how the very seminal book of Daoism is called the Tao Te Ching. And Jing means a classical book. Tao means the way, and Tet means virtue. So the Tao Te Ching is simply the classical book of the way of virtue. And this is what it teaches, how to live a virtuous life that is both effective and efficient. And I studied under them, Master Ni and George. I studied in a small Daoist group in Miami for 8 years. Threw the coins every single day for those 8 years. And I will just tell you, if you've never been introduced to the I Ching, it is, as Master Ni would say, the I Ching is nothing much. It is simply the path to gaining mastery in life. That's what, and it really is. It teaches you how to go with the flow and to identify the flow and to align yourself with the energy that's around you so that you're being effective and efficient. So anyway, I'd love to go into that more in a little bit, but just to finish up, I ran into a conflict of opinion, let's call it, with my Italian mobster client, and felt that it was helpful if I would leave Miami. So I wound up moving to North Carolina, and I started my career over, working first for the prosecutor's office and then in private practice. But the difference was that in Miami, my career was all about money and arrogance and being at the top of my profession. And that when I got to North Carolina, it was nothing more than public service. And after I left the DA's office, I resigned and I decided that I would represent only indigent clients. Matter of fact, after a couple of years, I decided I would go back to school and get a master's in social work, just so that I could take care of my clients more holistically, because I was tired of seeing the revolving door. I would take care of their legal stuff. They would go back out there, do their punishment. They come out, be reoffending. I'd see them again. And I just didn't want that to happen. So I needed to find out how I could be with them in such a way that it would make a difference in their lives. And I did. I'm one of the proudest things that I can tell you that I've achieved in my life is that several of my clients have come out and turned to having a productive and happy life.
That's wonderful, Bob. Thanks for sharing that. And wow, there's so many things here to entry points to dive in, and so many things I wouldn't want to cover. And we'll just start there at the end, where it's admirable. And what came up is that it seems like some of these social systems are almost rigged or stacked against the person a lot of times. So it's so great that have a wise, caring individual that can throw themselves in there and kind of knows some of the system from the law end and can kind of take personal responsibility and personal empowerment, no matter how functioning the system is or how dysfunctional it is. So yeah, not to get too much into politics with that or cause too much of a stir, but that's great to hear. Now the Tao Te Ching, this is, first off, that's the one that I like, this notion of you can pick that up, people that are interested in this, you could read it once and then you pick it up another, like maybe a year later and read it again. And then it's like, it can almost be like an entirely different book, right? And it's almost like a litmus test or a gauge where one's at in their wisdom and where they're at on their journey and their understanding and their conduct. And so I find that one fascinating. I'm not, so this is like going to be a school session for me. I'm not really that familiar with Daoism. I'm more in the Buddhist practices. The other thing I wanted to pick up, I just had a copy of the I Ching. I think maybe even high school or college, but I never really got into it. It just sat around on the bookshelf, you know. I was familiar with it more as a system of divination that some people use it for.
Right.
And it's more of an Eastern thing, of course, where forms of divination in the West, it's not as popular. The other thing I was interested in is in Shaolin, because I studied with a Buddhist Shifu whose, I think, grandfather was at Shaolin Temple. So I thought it was more of a Buddhist place. And I know China, right? They mix like Confucianism, Daoism, and Buddhism. But tell me a little bit more about the Shaolin Temple, I guess, just to clear that up. As far as like sects or like, is it Buddhist? Is it Daoist?
No, it's Daoist. It is Daoist. But, you know, there's a wonderful etching called the Vinegar Tasters, which has a vat of vinegar and three wise men in Chinese garb. All of them have their finger in their mouth, but with different expressions on their face. And one is a Confucianist, one's a Buddhist, and one's a Daoist. And those are the three legs of Chinese thinking, of philosophy. I would say that the Confucianist is more of our desires can overtake us and lead us into bad ways. And so we have to be very disciplined and have very strict rules about conduct. The Buddhist more is that it's not the pain that occurs in life. It is your response to it. And it is what you do in your mind in dealing with the pain of life that creates suffering. And they distinguish between pain and suffering. Pain is unavoidable, suffering is. And in Buddhism, there's wonderful, wonderful techniques for learning how to effectively deal with what life gives you. And in Taoism, it is a slightly different take on it. It's basically the same idea that life is going to flow and you are going to respond to it. But it creates the concept of the idea that there is a certain flow of energy in life. You can recognize it this way. Have you ever been in a conversation and you have a great idea and you just know it's a great idea and you're trying to describe it to people and they just won't listen? Right?
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Right.
Pretty common.
And then there are other times when people are completely open to listening to you. So in Taoism, those would be considered two different energy states. And the question in Taoism is, how do you deal effectively and efficiently with each of those states? And Taoism would say, well, when people are not able and the energy is such that they're not listening to you, stop talking and use the time to think about and contemplate a better way to say what you want to say, so that when the time changes and they are ready to listen to you, you are well prepared to talk into their listening. It's that's the yin and yang concept. And so Taoism concentrates on that aspect, that yin and yang. And that's why Tai Chi, you see people going forward and coming back. It's just feeling the energy. And when and that's exactly what the I Ching teaches. So if I could just pick up on what you say as a book of divination. Carl Jung, the famed German psychotherapist, spent a great deal of time with the I Ching. And his take on it was this, that we inherently have a deep wisdom that is intuitive within us. And if we can find a way to call on that and make it accessible by giving it language, which is how our logical mind uses intelligence, we can bring it up to our consciousness and we can make use of it. And that the I Ching is the bridge between our intuitive mind and our verbal mind. And so when we want to ask a question like, what do I need to know about the interview today? You throw the coins and do a lot of math so that it ties up your logical mind with math and gets it out of the way so that your intuitive mind can delve down and pick up your inherent wisdom. Now, the only task is to bridge. So when you read the suggested reading, you are actually putting into the words your own answer, which you already had to the question, but you're picking out the words that are going to give your verbal mind ability to use the intuitive answer in a conscious way.
Well, that's fascinating. I didn't know that. I really appreciate that. And what's coming up for me with that is, well, that's fascinating because I'm sure this wasn't written in English, right? And I'm sure there's some more translations that resonate with others than, and the whole notion of language itself is just so completely fascinating. Like the word choices we even use, like how does that happen? It just happens a lot on autopilot. Just think of all the maybe even millions of words from that we could possibly choose from are sentence structures, and they just kind of flow, and all the causes and conditions involved with that. So that's one thing. But since you're really into the I Ching, I'll ask the big question here.
Yeah.
What do you know about the origins of this? Because I'm sure it's maybe more mysterious, or maybe there's mythological. I have no idea, but I like when I investigate things, I love to look into the origins, and something as profound and meaningful as this that probably has affected so many lives, throughout time. What is the origin?
Well, all I can tell you is the legend.
Okay.
It is over 4,000 years old. So, whatever the origins were and whoever the wise folks who, put it down. But the legend is that an emperor was literally sitting on the pot and looking at the back of a turtle. And it was the squares on the turtle that gave him the insight to write it.
So, how many tetrads are there? Or is it a tetrad, or how many is there? Turtles, well, yeah, that's a whole nother huge symbol. And yeah, the Native American, right? The story where the world is sitting on a turtle, and then somebody asked, what's under the turtle? And they said, well, another turtle. And then they ask another, and he said, oh, it's just turtles all the way down.
All the way down. Well, that kind of reminds me of a way that John Kabat-Zinn talks about judgment in meditation. He says that, of course, the meditative technique is to form an intention to put your attention on something like your breath. Then your mind wanders. And at some point, because you created the intention, you notice that your mind wandered. And most of folks, who have that experience, like when you're talking to somebody, when somebody's talking to you and your mind wanders, and then all of a sudden you notice that you haven't been listening. And all of a sudden, then your mind is full of judgments. Oh, I should have been listening, and how can I do this? And so those judgments are what John Kabat-Zinn was talking about. And he said, so you'll have these judgments, and you want to then be gentle and kind with yourself and see if you can come back and begin again. And if you can't let go of the judgments, then perhaps you can be non-judgmental about your judgments. And if you can't be non-judgmental about your judgments, perhaps you can be non-judgmental about being judgmental about your judgments. And if you can't do that, perhaps you could be non-judgmental
all turtles all the way down.
Turtles all the way down.
It's a really good thing, and for people that's too much of a mental thing for them, compassion. We can have compassion for ourselves that we can't have compassion right now. If we can't have compassion for something in the moment, well, then we can at least have compassion for the fact that we can't have compassion.
Have compassion. Right. Turtles all the way down.
Exactly. Again. Okay, so. I know you have an expertise in an investigated, I don't say it's project in I would say, exploring Eastern and Western ways with maybe perhaps a merging of Taoism and Christianity. I want to get into that in a little bit. Before I do, I'm really fascinated with truth in general when it comes to the spiritual path. And I thought I might ask you if you have any wisdom, insight, or views, or what your take on it is. Just, and I mean, we could frame it so many different ways, but I just keep it general deliberately to see what you have to say about it, especially giving your background as a trial lawyer, because we have legal fictions, and then we have things that are facts, and then we have, truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And then we have your transition into more maybe spiritual truths, and then there's life in general. So, like, what would you want to say to this?
Ooh, okay.
It's huge.
So I think, yeah, you have to distinguish, I think, between facts and truth. Facts are things that happened. And, there are empirical ways of establishing whether they occurred or not. And even then, we can get into the whole idea of quantum physics and whether like solid is really solid and all that. But as far as, our general perception of things, if a car crashes, we can definitely say there's a fact that there's bent metal. I mean, there's things that empirically, jive with our perception of things, and we can all agree and have a consensus about facts. Although in the current political situation, we've heard of alternative facts. And so I guess we won't get into that. But then there's truth. And the moment you move into truth, then you're getting into something which also has a certain amount of opinion in it. And I think that the best way that I can think about it is to ask the question, does meaning have meaning? Is there any meaning in meaning? People say, what is the meaning of life? And is there any meaning in life? And meaning, if you're looking for an empirical answer to the question, what is the meaning of life? I don't think you'll ever find one. But you can decide for yourself what the meaning of your life is. And then that becomes your truth until it's not. There's a certain quality to a certain kind of speaking, like when you get married and, you say, I do. Will you take this person forever? So, you're making a pledge, a vow. And you as into Buddhism, that there are the secular vows and the monastic vows. And these are things that people say, this is my truth. This is what I'm going to do. But we may fail at it. We may decide at some point with different facts that come to our awareness that we need to renegotiate our truth. So, I have my ideas, and they are for my truth, and I accept them as my truth for now. If I can tell you a little story about that.
Please do, yes.
So with my son, we played a game around this very question. And generally, your truth is the first thought that comes up to you when something occurs. Like that person's a jerk. Well, that's your truth. Or I really like them, or they shouldn't wear their pants like that. These things, these judgments, they become our truth. So we used to play a game where if anybody, either of us, grabbed onto some kind of truth like that, the other would challenge it. So we went out to Applebee's, and the waitress came over, and you know how they are. Hi, I'm Jen. I'm going to be your waitress today, and I'm going to take the blah, blah, blah. So she walks away, and Michael says, boy, she's really bucking for a tip. So game on, all right? Because that was his truth. And I said to him, yeah, well, and excuse me but this is what I said. Yeah, well, maybe she got some last night. Excuse me for that. And he goes, yeah, well, maybe her parents gave her a car. And we're going back and forth like this for a while, coming up with all of the possibilities of why she was acting like that. And I finally said, no, I know what it is. She just thinks I'm incredibly handsome. That's what it is. And he says, yeah, well, and I go, game over. I'm going with that one. That's going to be my truth. That's my reason she thinks I'm incredibly handsome. And so I adopted that as my truth. And she got a big tip, and we had a wonderful time with her. And I walked away feeling good. And for that limited purpose, that truth worked best for me. So I'm not saying that you can abuse the idea, and create truths that allow you to do things that are harmful or allow or not helpful to your own life. It needs a little bit of wisdom, but I think that's my take.
Well, thanks for sharing that. That was a fun story, and that's some kind of healthy competition. I agree. It helps pass the time too while your food's coming out to you, I imagine. I would just, if I may, I frame it a little bit differently. When people say it's my truth, I usually just say, that's your perception,
Mm-hmm.
That's your perception. There's nothing wrong with that because we all see the world, differently. And so when I mean truth, I forgot what you said there, that it comes with opinions, but things like 2 + 2 = 4. As far as I know, there's really no opinions involved about that unless we kind of go off the deep end. But yeah, and so there's this teaching called the two truths that I find really helpful. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a relative truth, and that's what we mostly deal with every day. And then there's an absolute truth, right? And that's kind of more like the unconditioned, the Buddhists might call it nibbana, or the unailing, the deathless. Okay, so that's something we can't really put language to because we can point at it, right? But it's not the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're dealing with conventional truth and relative truth, and maybe there's different layers of that. But what I like about your statement is what's helpful about it. How are we going to view? And I think actually you're talking about views here, because we do have a choice in how we view situations. We can't always affect what happens to us, but we do have a choice in how we see it, right? Mm-hmm. How we view it and how we respond to it. And there are perceptions that are helpful and perceptions that are not helpful. So
absolutely,
yeah. So I think your story and your game there illustrates that quite well. All right. So now on to the next topic, which I want to maybe pick your brain a little bit. I think it was Thich Nhat Hanh that wrote a book, Living Buddha, Living Christ. Mm-hmm. And he's gone now. And he took on the task of trying to, compare the Buddha and Jesus, I guess. I can't remember if I've read it or not, but what little I looked into it, I really wasn't that satisfied with it. I mean, it's an admirable task. So when you took on this in Daoism, and with Jesus, what kind of drove you to this? What did you discover, kind of in your research? Or I don't know, driven is the right word, but
driven is.
And I think
correct.
you have a significant other that might play in here too in your project.
A significant what? I'm sorry.
Significant other.
Oh yes, that's absolutely.
Yes. Partner, whatever politically correct term we want to use. And by the way, your comment on politics, my kind of dismissal is politics is an emotional con game. So it's usually made to trigger people out emotionally a lot of times. But yes, so this notion of Jesus and Daoism, please.
Yeah. So when I came to North Carolina, I was married. We became divorced, and then I remarried a lady that was born and bred here in Burlington, North Carolina, and she is, although right now I would say she's probably a recovering Southern Baptist, Bible literalist. So she believes in Noah's Ark as historical fact. So there you go. Again, that whole truth thing, is it truth or fact or the like? But for her, it is her truth. It is her truth. They are historical facts. And she came, I remember one time when she was going off to church and I was going to be at home watching the news stories, and she had some sadness in her eyes, and I asked her about it, and she said, well, I just hate it that I love you so much, and you're not going to go to heaven with me, because I hadn't been saved. And I said to her that I was sorry that she would not be reincarnated with me, and she slapped me. But, she would go off to church, and she was very involved in church, and she had some frustrations with her church because it didn't seem like they were very concerned about the environment or some other things that were dear to her. And I kept asking her, what the sermon was about. What was the lesson today when she would come back? And every time she would tell me the lesson after I got past the exclusionary stuff and the sin stuff and all that.
Fire and brimstone, maybe?
Yeah, fire and brimstone. After we got out through that, well, what was the main lesson? And I would say, I remember that from the Tao Te Ching. It's the same lesson. Now, for those that haven't read the Tao Te Ching, it's 81 short, maybe one-page chapters that deal with leadership, that deal with how to live life, and the like. And, I'd say, I've read that. Yeah, I get that lesson. I get that lesson. So I would start to look back in my copies of the Tao Te Ching, for exactly where it was. And then I got curious. And I said, well, where did that come from in the Bible? So thank you to Google. I would start to ask, what does the Bible say about this and the Bible say about that? And the more I did that, the more I realized that the teachings, once you get away from the organized religion of Christianity, but the teachings of Christianity, and especially of Christ, are no different from any other Buddhist monk. I think that Christ, let me put it this way, that the Holy Spirit, if you see it that way, inspired all of the great wisdom leaders that have come to the earth with the same truth, things about compassion and love and the like. So it was easy to find passages and things that were right on point with the points that Lao Tzu made. And so now the task was, how do you go from a non-deistic philosophy to a deistic philosophy? And you have to take some liberties. I admit you have to take, but where, for example, in the first chapter of the Tao Te Ching, it says the Tao that can be named is not the true Tao. The way that, and Tao means the way. And, Christ said, I am the way. So that was the title of my book, I Am the Way. So that says, and in Genesis, it says, I am that I am. And God does not have a name. And in the Judeo tradition, you would not even write the words G-O-D on a piece of paper. You would write G*D, because Yahweh has no name. Or the name is unpronounceable.
Or there's a lot of different names too.
Or there's a lot. Well, then we get into Muslim. We get into Allah and various names in different traditions. So, yes. So it was easy, the Tao that has the Tao the Tao has no name to I am that I am was an easy jump. Now going from the way to the Lord and going from the way to heaven, it was a little bit more, took a little more liberty with it. But eventually I started to translate the teachings of the Tao Te Ching into Christian terminology. And as I did it, I would present it to my wife, and she loved it. She loved it. And finally, when I finished the book, all 81 chapters, she read it cover to cover, and now continues to use it as a devotional. And she said to me, all the preachers I've ever known have taught me what to do and what not to do and how to think and how not to think, but they never taught me Jesus. the way this book has presented him to me. And I thought that was great high praise. And so I was lucky that a publisher heard about it and contacted me, and now it's been published by a traditional publisher.
Very cool. Yeah, it's interesting how an instance and an occurrence, on Sundays, it kind of prompted this research and study and these connections, and challenging yourself to take those liberties actually, and see what you could do with that, and come up with. So yeah, sounds like quite a fascinating project.
4 years.
Wow.
4 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I live in a college town, and there's a church here which is very, very progressive Christian church from United Church of Christ. And I heard about the UCC ministers in North Carolina when gay marriage was still illegal. They filed a lawsuit against North Carolina saying that it interfered with their religious liberty. And when I read about that, I said, now see, that's the kind of Christianity that I think, Christ would have enjoyed. So I went and I visited the local church, and sure enough, they were in the process of declaring themselves to be open and affirming, gay friendly, and the like. And we're in the middle of a year-long introspection. And I asked to get involved in that. Eventually, I asked Connie, my wife, I said, I'd like you to come check this church out. So she kind of goes, no, because I had brought her to all these weird, churches and stuff before. And so I said to her, because she's a big environmentalist, they have solar panels. She goes, really? They have recycling bins. They even have a green committee. And she goes, oh, I got to check this out. So she comes and they read from scripture, and she turns to me. She goes, Bob, they're teaching from scripture. And I go, well, yeah, it's a Christian church. And she goes, yeah, but you like it. I go, yeah, I kind of do like it here, So I got baptized. Now she's happy that I'm going to go to heaven with her. And I'm happy she's going to be reincarnated with me. We'll go through a couple of lives before we get to heaven. That's my truth.
Well, that's quite wonderful, Bob. And yeah, I was thinking something opposite, Southern Baptist, but what you said, recovering, right? So I think before we start wrapping up here, I want to spend a few minutes talking about you teaching meditation and your work at a university and stuff. So what can you say about this? Because, that's kind of my bread and butter, or that's what I'm really into. So yeah, tell us a little bit about your meditation journey and what kind of meditation you teach, and maybe your style, and anything else relevant with it.
Sure. So Daoism doesn't emphasize like insight meditation as much as Buddhism does. It's more contemplative and physical sensations, the sensation of the energy that's around. When I came to North Carolina, there's not a lot of Daoists, and so I started attending Buddhist temples, and of course meditation is everything. So I started meditating, had a couple of fits and starts over the years, and then finally got a coach and mentor. And from that point on, it's been a consistent practice. Eventually, I went and was classically trained in Tibetan Buddhism, 2 years intensive, and came to retired from the law. They asked me to teach at Elon law course, and I found out about Koru, Koru, which is a process of teaching meditation designed for Western sensibilities. In that, I wouldn't say to you, oh, it's a 2-year thing where you're going to have to sit 30 minutes a day and look at all these videos and be interviewed and da-da-da. It is a 5-week course where you meet 1.5 hours, and they design with me, and then they designed a digital infrastructure where the student has guided meditations on the app, and then puts in a log after their session, 10-minute meditation. So it's 1.5 hours a week, 10 minutes a day for 4 weeks, and 1 week of orientation. They do that log every day, and that comes to my dashboard. And every morning I get up and read the log, and I respond and give coaching every single day. So you actually pack a year's worth of coaching into 4 weeks. And at the other end of it, the person that comes out of it will actually know what meditation is, will have experienced it, and will know whether or not it's a practice that they want to dig into seriously, or whether it's just going to be another tool in their tool belt. But they'll have a good idea and be able to make an informed decision because they'll know what it is. And so there's so many, and I love teaching it to the college kids because I get all these comments in the logs like, oh, I just noticed that there are crickets outside my window after 2 years, or, oh, I came back from class and I was so upset about the bad day. Then I did my 10 minutes and then I was able to do my homework. You see these changes inside of about the third week when they finally get it, that it's all about watching the mind wander. It's not about emptying the mind. Everybody thinks meditation is, I have to empty the mind and I'm going to be peaceful and tranquil and tinkle, tinkle and crystals, and none of that. It's all about, it's a very active practice of watching the mind and eventually then labeling thoughts and kind of letting the way I like to put it is, it's a way of taking disturbing thoughts and putting them in a file cabinet so that you know where they are and they can stop bothering you.
Yeah, there's so many different strategies for working with the mind. One of the ones I heard recently, and language makes a big deal with that, or makes a big difference with this too, is an emotion or thought can just be an invitation that we don't have to take up,
That's great.
Yeah, and that way there's not this conflict or, negative view of thoughts, because the mind it's a genius machine, right? But it's just not the tool for every job. And so it's and it does take a training, and I love this structure that you're talking about with the feedback, and it sounds it's really good for training coaches too. So that's be checking that out.
It's real good. KORU. It's developed at Duke University and rigorously investigated, and it is evidence based, and it really does work.
Cool.
Really does work.
Well, Bob, thanks so much for joining today. Could you leave people with your website, the name of your book, anything you have going on? I mean, I don't know if you want to put a pitch in for the university too, anything else you want to plug as well, and then take people out, take the listeners out on whatever you'd like to leave us with today.
Okay. So anything that you want to know about me and my books and everything, you can find it on awiseandhappylife.com. It's all one word, awiseandhappylife.com. You can go there. I offer a free ebook called What is Meditation? Is It For Me? And you can just go to my website and there's a little button to push, and it's a free ebook, and I'm happy to offer that. And all the information about Koru and my books and everything's on the website. And to leave with something, I would just leave with this: that just remember that how many times have you said, "I had a thought. I had a thought." So just remember that it is you who has the thoughts, and you are not your thoughts. You're not your thoughts. You have thoughts. You are the creator of your thoughts, and you have a say in the matter of what thoughts that you have. But it does take a little time in reprogramming the database that creates the thoughts. And you can do this. It doesn't take a lot. 10 minutes a day makes a huge difference. And I guess the only other thing I would say is have a pet. Especially dogs. have a dog.
Well, wonderful, Bob. I appreciate you coming on and sharing your wisdom and knowledge and your beautiful heart too. So
Thank
may
you.
all beings everywhere come to know the most wise and loving relationship with their thoughts and animals too. So everyone be well.